Sarah Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television, inviting you to another edition of What's Up Missoula. Today in the studio we're going to visit with Sarah Van de Wettering. She is the Deputy Director of Western Progress. Pat Williams, former Congressman for Montana, is also here. He is the Director of the Northern Rockies Office for Western Progress. Thank you both so much for coming.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. So for people watching, I guess there's the most basic question. Encapsulation, what is Western Progress? Where did the idea come from?
Western Progress is a nonpartisan, policy issue-oriented institution, almost brand new.
Right.
We have offices now in Phoenix, Arizona, Denver, Colorado, and here in Missoula, Montana. We have a staff of about a dozen or so full-time folks. And we are exploring the progressive ideals and traditions of the Rocky Mountain West and trying to mold that tradition into contemporary tools, today's tools, legislative, policy, other kinds of tools that Westerners might use to make a positive difference in their own lives and the lives of this region.
So it's pretty far-ranging. You mentioned Phoenix, Denver, and Missoula
Yes.
as hubs for this activity.
That's right.
And the organization is taking into account a broad range of Western states: California, Nevada, Arizona.
Not the far western states,
Okay.
Joel. Not that our Pacific Rim of states.
Right.
Not Washington, Oregon, or California, but the Rocky Mountain West.
Right.
Yes, and it is far-ranging because, after all, the Rocky Mountain region is a region of great diversity and variety, and that's why we have these three offices, or three silos, in the Southwest, which of course is very different than the Northern Rockies, and in the middle of the Rockies, serving Wyoming and Utah and Colorado, with an office in Denver.
Right. You know, Pat, people watching say, oh my gosh, here's this man that represented Montana so ably for so many years. He's in this new endeavor. How does this new endeavor translate to a better life for me? Like, the connection people saw, I think,
Sure.
between your representation and their lives, very strong. So we do a show and we say, whoa, remember Pat Williams? He's still at it. He's at this place, this Western Progress place. So what do you say to people about the work you're doing and how it may affect them?
Well, I say a couple of things. One is I still teach at the University of Montana and do this as well. I took an unpaid leave for about a third of my time to help get Western Progress started and move it through its first few years. I think it relates to people in fairly direct ways, and I understand the difficulty of trying to determine how policy/politics, although we're nonpartisan, but how it is that does make a positive difference in the lives of individual Montanans or folks that live in Idaho or New Mexico and so on. And the way it does, of course, is to, once again, as was once done in Montana history, re-energize progressive thinking among individuals in the West, who, after all, for a long time, helped lead this country, whether it was on the liberal side or the conservative side. That is, whether it was with Mo Udall or a Mike Mansfield or a Barry Goldwater. Westerners came up with some of the great ideas that helped shape this country and this region. Lately, maybe not so much. Maybe we haven't tapped the neighborhoods and the grassroots and gotten the innovative ideas. Maybe we've gotten a little slow as a people because we aren't being asked for our ideas anymore. Western Progress wants to sort of hook that engine back up to this great traditional train in the West.
And build a community of leaders and thinkers that can come together and forge their ideas. Use maybe that synergy of this one's coming from here and that one's coming from there.
Use the ideas. We aren't so much interested in candidacies or promotion of individuals, but rather get the best ideas from people. And those ideas we would like, again, to be in the old progressive tradition of the Rocky Mountain West.
That kind of leads to an interesting question that I was given, in relation to the interview, and it's I want Sarah to bring you in, and so you could talk about stuff too. And it's a really interesting question because, Pat, you brought that up, progressive. And then one of the questions here is, what does progressive mean? How is progressive distinguished from liberal? And I'm almost hearing from you, it's innovative. It's something that says, well, maybe there's an entirely new way, rather than a perspective that says, well, this has worked before, we're just going to do more, or we're going to do less of it and see what happens. But Sarah, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, very much. And it's one of the things that really attracted me to Western Progress is the very pragmatic look ahead at solutions that really work for this region, and to be forward-looking in our agenda, and to think back in the traditions. The progressive traditions of this area were not dependent on political party. They were dependent on somebody looking forward what's best for this society, and that's really what we're rooted in, which is part of our nonpartisan affiliation. And in addition to what Pat was saying about bringing folks together to come up with these progressive ideas, I think the other really important role that we can serve is helping to articulate the concerns of the people in this region in a way that they often don't get articulated by all different kinds of institutes and organizations and nonprofits that operate outside of this region, that purport to be national in their scope. They frequently speak for everybody in the same voice, and the way they talk, the words that they use and the language that they use often doesn't resonate very well with the folks here in the Rocky Mountain West. So that's the idea of having an institute that's based here in this region, that's staffed by people from this region, and that really focuses on issues here in a bigger national context. So as a policy institute, we hope both to take the best ideas that are being developed all over the country, help be a conduit to get those to policymakers, but also to be a place in which the voice of the people here in this region gets heard better and in a more productive way toward policy solutions, all nationally, not just in this region.
It's like a sense of renewal. Rather than alignment with the powers that be, you want to be aligned with new voices or new solutions to problems confronting the West, which are particular to the West.
Sure. It's not that we experience problems that other people don't, but we experience them differently here. And in many cases, the solutions need to be tailored better to the place and to the situation of the people who live in this place.
Is it a very wide scope of interest that Western Progress takes on? Would you say that the scope of interest are about economic problems, energy problems, sustainability problems, social issues, education, this wide scope of civic endeavor, or is it more narrow? Or is it more narrow at different times?
Well, it's fairly wide, but we obviously, as with any group, we're going to have to, and we are focusing on simply a few issues at a time. Let's, for example, take just the environment. That's a very broad issue. What Western Progress is interested in is not only trying to develop some tools to help us repair our environment. You know, the West, for better or worse, was the land of timbering and mining and oil and gas, and inadvertently or not, scars were left on the landscape, and those can be, we can restore that landscape. But there's a larger issue that Western Progress is interested in, and that is, why is it that the national government, or why is it that Americans seem to no longer look west for answers, particularly on the environment? Look, the environment, landscape to Westerners is not an abstraction. It's not an issue in a presidential debate over, out, and done with. We work, live, and play on the environment. It's part of our lives. We can't extract ourselves from it. And yet, the nation doesn't seem to come west to say, well, what do you all think we ought to do with the environment? Maybe we ought to ask the people that actually work on it and play on it and live on it. Well, Western Progress wants to reignite that in the nation. We want the nation to say, hey, we have to quit ignoring, both as a policy matter, issues, and politically. We have to quit ignoring the fastest growing region in America, and that's the 8 states of the Rocky Mountain West. Let's go out there and find out what they think. And then we hope Western Progress will be one of the places that folks come to try to develop answers to what are quickly becoming very severe international and national dilemmas.
When you characterize the people you work with, and maybe that's an unfair question to try to do so, would you say it is a collection of academics? Or is it more broad than that? Or do you feel very comfortable saying, well, it's a collection of very well-informed academics?
I think Sarah can answer that because she's stood on several of those groups that you're asking about.
It's a diverse group, and we have a combination of people who come from state government, from national and local journalism positions, from advocacy organizations, and from academia. I think I've covered, and from private industry. We have people coming from all those places in our dozen who work for Western Progress. And we really bring different abilities and different approaches to these issues. We're very much oriented toward responding quickly and articulately to issues as they arise. We have a very strong communications team. A lot of people in our group are very good writers and framers of issues, but we also have a good, deep policy group that knows how to drill down into issues and really think deeply about what all the different options are for action.
And action directed in a public education manner, or is it more specific where you'd say, we are framing a policy and we want to present this policy to these decision makers?
Well, we're going to be working in all these different areas. I mean, short, quick response and long-term development of options. And one of the areas in which we help frame up the discussion is by bringing folks together for very direct discussion of issues such as the one Pat mentioned, how do we deal with the problems of our environment in this region? And we're doing that, for example, with a gathering that we're having here in Missoula in a couple of weeks on the restoration economy in this region. We're looking at what are the opportunities to benefit in our communities and with new jobs while cleaning up the messes in our environment.
Like
So-
people do talk about Butte and say, well, Butte is going to become this hotbed of how to deal with environmental issues because there's such a strong one there.
Right. From
Things
Butte
that-
to the Montana-Idaho border along this wonderful Clark Fork Basin, which is now being cleaned up spectacularly, and a dam coming out that your
That's
audience
pretty
knows so
amazing.
well.
Yeah.
This is one of the great centers of restoration in America. Clark Fork Basin is the largest, I don't like the term, but it's the largest Superfund site in the world, in America. It's the largest restoration site by square miles in the United States. And so Western Progress has chosen Missoula, near the Milltown Dam,
Right.
for this conference of ours. A relatively small conference. Some experts coming in will develop some tools to how to try to begin to get particularly government leaders thinking about restoration as its own economy, the same way mining was an economy and timber was an economy. Restoration, it seems to us, is now one of the great future exploding economies, but it needs guidance, it needs funding, it needs management, and perhaps above all, it needs branding so that we
People
recognize it
understand
as
that
an economy.
That's an activity.
And so you see, it's no longer, gee, it's the environment versus jobs. It's really jobs through environmental repair. That's where the West is going.
That the environmental consciousness can provide just as much opportunity as the lumber industry might have, as the mining industry.
Sure.
Well, and interestingly, it's not even in contrast, because in many restoration opportunities, and some of the ones that we'll be featuring in this program, the timber industry is an active participant because restoration of our forests in some cases involves production of timber products. And so timber companies can benefit, people get employed, and it restores the health of the forest and reduces the risk of catastrophic wildfires in areas in which fires have been suppressed. That's an example. So the industries are active partners with these restoration efforts. It's one of the beauties of this, and it's part of how we've been so careful about who we're bringing together for this gathering, is to get a good mix of those kinds of folks. Labor,
say another word.
environmentalists. and-
Excuse me.
That's all right.
Yeah. I want to say another word about restoration. Restoration, we find as we delve into it, I've been trying to deal with it from my position at the University of Montana for several years. Restoration tends to bring old allies back together. You know, at one time, workers, that is particularly the organized workforce, and environmentalists were in tune. They saw things together. When I was younger in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, front part of the 90s, it all began to come apart, but environmentalists and workers used to be one and the same people.
Interesting.
They can be again. They can be again. They just need a common product. And the common product for workers is jobs, and for environmentalists is a restored landscape. They can be friends again. Environmentalists and timber can find ways to get along. The timber companies, the environmentalists, they can
Wouldn't
find
that be
through
hopeful?
restoration.
Yeah.
And that helps us heal up our community because, Joel, you and I and Sarah, and I think everybody watching has a sense that that divisions are more important today in America, and anger and jeopardy is more important than pulling together and cohesiveness and collectiveness. The restoration economy can't solve all of those problems, but it can help, and we ought to get on with it in a really, really significant way.
That is a kind of wonderful thought. That has a sense of restoration both for the landscape and for the people that were polarized by economic fears and concerns. Yeah, I was just saying to Sarah before we started taping, one of my personal things was to stop labeling and dismissing. When we were talking about how is progressive distinguished from liberals, and we were talking about the public perception of think tanks as coming from a very particular place. Okay, so there's polarization. Which side of either or is this on? Heritage Foundation versus People for the American Way. And how, as consumers of information, we tend to say, what is it? Okay, I'll put it in this bin. And this thinking stops. It's identify and dispose. And it's a very bad trend. It may come from too much information. I don't know.
Well, and that division and people's rejection of that division is a lot behind the creation of Western Progress. I think that Pat could speak better to this, but a lot of the roots of this organization came out of the recent electoral trends in this region, where you see the voters saying, I'm not crazy about the people that call themselves all the way this or the people that call themselves all the way that. We like the guy who has the good ideas, and that's who we're voting for. And that has been
And
the
that's
trend.
kind of a definition of progressive.
Sure. Well, I think so, yeah. Now, there's no question, and I don't think anyone denies that there is at least one division, and always has been for mankind politically or policy. And one, we kind of in America talk about one is on the left and the other one's on the right. One's more liberal, one's more conservative. But Missoula is a good place to talk about this. One of the most progressive, I wouldn't say liberal, progressive members of Congress in Montana's history was Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin, to the surprise of a lot of people, pals of mine, Jeannette Rankin was a Republican. But she was a
didn't know that
progressive. No, most people don't. They never guess it because the sort of things that Jeannette Rankin was for, the hallmarks of her career, are now thought to be Democratic Party values. Really what they were was progressive values. Right? They were progressive values. So if you can move a little bit away from just thinking things as you've laid out so well as liberal or Democrat, as being polarized, and move instead to that old Western tradition that says, look, if we think it's going to work, we're going to try it.
Right.
And we don't care which basket we take it out of.
A
That's
sense of
progressive.
practicality,
Sense
in
of
a way, a sense of
practicality,
practicality that goes beyond definitions, where Europe is left further behind, and that kind of sense of pigeonholed civilization opens up in a more free way.
Yeah.
I don't know
It's
how we're
interesting,
doing
isn't
for
it?
time either. I want to make sure I cover all the questions,
Yeah.
But they're good things to think about, aren't
Yeah,
they?
I like it.
And that is really great what you said about that, because on the way here I saw a bumper sticker said, are you an environmentalist or do you have a job?
Yep.
Yes.
Kind of
That's the
polarizing,
old
polarizing,
wisecrack
yep.
type
Nonsensical.
thing
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
We for too long, I think in America, and this is less about issue than maybe it is about our political habits as of late, of the last 20 years or so, we've begun to allow bumper stickers to dictate our politics for us, whether it's fraud, waste, and abuse or whatever it is. And if you think about those bumper stickers that so many people lived by for 20 years, and you examine what they mean, they're meaningless.
There's almost a non sequitur, you mean, because it takes a complex issue, crunches it into a phrase
Yeah.
that's all about, are you this or are you that?
Right,
And then the
right.
discussion ends.
They're very
Yeah.
dismissive, and,
Yeah.
and, you know, I think we need to be more inclusive by
Yeah.
contrast, so. yeah.
So the projects you're currently working on, one is this conference that's going to be experts, people, stakeholders in the field of the restoration economy. It's set here so these people can come and see what's going on at
We're
the
taking them
Milltown
out to
Dam.
see Milltown Dam. Yep.
Right.
We're going to be talking about examples of the restoration economy emerging throughout the region. But one of the ideas of having it here was to hold it in a place where it's so visible, it's so well
Yeah.
known. So yeah, we're having that here. Happily, it's going to be televised here on MCAT.
That's right, so people can watch.
We're filming the whole thing, and it'll
Right.
be.
You're very kind to do that. You're very
We're
generous.
we're
Oh,
really
you're
happy
most
about that,
welcome
and that
for
makes
that.
it accessible to a lot of folks who otherwise couldn't be part of this small discussion. And out of that, I think there will be a number of follow-up activities, and it's a very action-oriented gathering. We're going to be identifying potential legislation that we could help advocate in the different states, possibly new coalitions of people that might like to join together formally, that we could sort of be a catalyst for that. Maybe there's further research that we could be part of. You know, it's hard to say, but there will be a lot of follow-up to that. At the same time, we're involved in other kinds of issues and activities. We're dealing with Western water right now, bringing together an even smaller group of people, but focusing in on what areas of Western water resource and management, especially in light of climate change and growth, could we make a difference in. So we're doing that at the same time. We've been working on renewable energy issues. That was the focus of our first workshop last spring. We're looking toward opportunities to advocate for this region in healthcare policy, and that's going to be the focus of our spring 2008 workshop,
Right.
our gathering. And we're looking at tax equity, and well, you know, we're sort of moving outward in our issue areas as we identify opportunities and needs.
How is it funded? Where does the impetus for it come from?
Private funding. There's an interesting thing about, I was on the founding board for this and was one of the people that helped develop the idea for Western Progress. And I'm not a fundraiser. Joel, when I ran 10 times. You were kind at the top of the program to mention that I served Montana for a long time in the United States House of Representatives. And during all that time, my staff used to complain because I wouldn't ask for money. I'm not a fundraiser. So what I'm about to tell you is what other people have done for Western Progress. I don't know how to raise money myself, but we did gather up some people that were interested in progressive thought in the West, and they went to some of their friends. Initially, people with money, I guess, and said to them, look, some of them were Rocky Mountain Westerners, some of them were people that are greatly concerned about the Rocky Mountain West, but might live outside of any of these states, many of them within the states as well. Here's my point. When the fundraisers within Western Progress fanned out and tried to start raising money, they found a very receptive audience. People in America sense that something's going on in the West politically. There's some kind of not only new growth out here, new population, new ethnicity, but they sense there are new ideas coming, that the West is beginning to flower again as an area, a region that develops innovative policy solutions. People opened their checkbook and started writing us checks. And we raised, I don't know, $1.5 million, $2 million in a heartbeat, which just shocked me.
I'll bet.
But that allowed us to get going, open our 3 offices, hire people, travel some, hold these workshops. Even small workshops like ours are relatively expensive. And I say this not to say, oh, gee, Western Progress was able to raise a lot of money. It wasn't Western Progress that raised the money. It was the notion people had about this new West, something going on out here that's progressive and enlightened. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And in a way, this type of funding gives Western Progress a great deal of freedom.
Absolute freedom,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Because there are no You know, we say to
They're
people,
not
look,
much
if you want to
strings.
give
It
us the
doesn't sound
money,
as if
there's
much string is attached.
No, no,
So-
nothing.
We're
no.
not beholden to
Yeah.
grant conditions and that sort of thing. We're
Or
we're-
political parties. It's
No,
not the idea of a
definitely
political
not
party,
that,
like,
no.
oh,
Right.
let's have an agenda that these people will enunciate.
In fact, we've applied for what's called a 3C to the IRS, a 3C, which means we have to be nonpartisan.
Right.
Can't be in any way partisan. Can't support candidates. Can't be involved in campaigns. We just want to usher forth new ideas.
Yeah.
And we can be advocates for ideas, and we will be. But we also are based on solid research and information.
Yeah, we discussed that before we
communications,
taped that
Yeah.
another way of trying to break down barriers is get people to be convinced that not everything is selling a bill of goods that is related to something facile, greedy, or is that I think a tendency in American cynicism is to look at ideas as the props of some higher unknown power. Well, they're just doing that so the big guys can.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And that would be a very nice perception to change, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
The early environmental movement, sprung out of the grassroots. It really did. I mean, it just sort of came out of here.
Yeah.
One of the early environmental legislators was Senator Lee Metcalf, a great Montana senator who lived over the hill here in the Bitterroot. Well, those early environmental ideas awakened America, but they were correctly perceived as having come out of the streets and the neighborhoods, not handed to us from the top down.
Right.
Right? Well, we need to get back to that a little bit. I'm not against the federal government. I think there are some things that can only be solved by the federal government. But nonetheless, a lot of the ideas that the federal government has to get come from here and places like this. So that's part of what we're trying to do is generate those ideas.
Yeah, without maybe the standing of population, without the standing of outstanding wealth,
Yeah,
as California, New York, Massachusetts might
Sure,
exhibit.
sure.
You're saying, how can we put our concerns and beyond that, ideas we have that will improve the entire fabric of society before the eyes of decision makers and policymakers?
well put.
That was very well put.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
I think what we do have is we can stand on a great sense of identity here in this region, and that's something that is not so much based on how many people are here or how much money is here, but a great sense of being a Westerner, being a part of the Rocky Mountain West, and a sense that we have the ability to make decisions that are good for this area. That's a very strong shared identity in that sense, and we're trying to tap into that, not direct it, but tap into it and inform it, and also help it get a bigger voice.
Well, best of luck to you, and thank you so much for coming here to tell people about the start of what sounds like it's going to be a pretty fascinating adventure, too.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
I
indeed,
appreciate it.
Joel. Thank you for
most
having us
welcome.
by.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for watching this edition of What's Up Missoula. If you'd like to learn more about Western Progress, there is a website, www.westernprogress, all one string, I'll put it on the screen for you right there, .org. If you know of a group you'd like to see on the show, give us a call at MCAT. The number is 542-6228. For MCAT, I'm Joel Baird. Thanks for watching.